Exactly 2 years ago today, my dearest friend and closest colleague was diagnosed with an aggressive lung cancer which was spreading rapidly. By the time they discovered it, she was already beyond medical help. Of the 6 weeks they predicted, she survived just a month, passing away on Easter Day 2019. I loved her. She was glamorous and charming, sharp as a tack, and generous to a fault. She was also a pioneer and a visionary, but never in a remote kind of way. She was warm and engaging, with a mischievous sense of humour, and a remarkable talent for making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she was speaking with you. I've lost count of the number of people, men and women, who've told me they fell in love with her, or that a conversation with her turned their lives around. And working with her was a combination of enormous fun, deadly seriousness, and unpredictable adventure. And she left me a rather unusual legacy. Her name was Polly Higgins, and she was a lawyer. Having given up a lucrative career in the courtroom, she dedicated the last 10 years of her life, 4.5 of which I spent working closely with her, to just one thing: putting in place a law to protect the earth. Together we co-founded a campaign in 2017, and it is this campaign that I inherited from her when she died. It's a campaign you may not have heard of, but it's based on a single, simple idea, an idea that has the power to turn the entire planetary ship around. The concept is this: make ecocide an international crime. What do we mean by ecocide? Quite simply, the destruction of ecosystems, just as homicide is killing a person or genocide is destroying a people. Ecocide of all kinds has been committed repeatedly and relentlessly over many decades by some of the world's biggest corporations, leading inexorably to the global climate and ecological emergency in which we find ourselves. Ecocide is, in fact, a root cause of the existential crisis humanity is now facing. And right now, unlike genocide, it is still, for the most part, permitted by law. We all know you can't go to a government and get a permit to slaughter people for your new business. Killing people is criminal. But you can get a permit to open a mine, or to frack for oil and gas, or to engage in industrial fishing of the kind that destroys entire swathes of the seabed. You can destroy soil ecosystems and insect ecosystems with toxic pesticides. You can chop and burn down rainforest with impunity. There's a little story that explains this rather clearly. About a decade ago, the head of a major UK bank was asked in a meeting, "Why is it that you continue to finance these destructive activities?" His response, "Well, it's not a crime." Clearly, it's time to change the rules. Now, in our Western dominant culture, we draw the moral line using criminal law. And it is criminal law that is missing with regard to ecocide. There are thousands of environmental regulations around the world already in place. But corporations tend to treat them as complications to be worked around. They might adjust their budgeting for a new regulation to accommodate more court cases or compensation claims. But they don't change their behaviour. Why? Because it's easier and more profitable not to. There is currently no enforceable deterrent in place to prevent mass damage and destruction of ecosystems, destruction of nature. But there can be, and it's actually quite simple, almost laughably so. Make ecocide a crime, creating personal, individual criminal responsibility for key decision makers. No CEO wants to be seen or prosecuted as a criminal. It's really bad for your share price. Banks cannot finance criminal activity. Insurers can't underwrite it. Government ministers can't issue permits for it. So how can this be done? There is a straightforward, effective way to make ecocide a crime on a global scale, and that is by amending the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, or ICC for short. Now, the ICC is really interesting because of how it works. It's the only global mechanism that directly accesses the already existing criminal justice systems of all its member states. So if you make something a crime at the ICC, any member state ratifying that crime must also include it in their own domestic legislation. This makes it the most efficient way to create a coherent law across borders. And that's fundamentally important with environmental crimes, because the worst offenders are huge transnational corporations. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court governs, and I quote, "the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole." Currently, these are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and more recently added, the crime of aggression. Now we know, because now we can plainly see, that there are in reality deeply serious consequences to destroying ecosystems. We're seeing these consequences playing out in ever more apocalyptic ways. Fires, floods, droughts, hurricanes, poisoned water, depleted soils, contaminated air, multiple crises that are leading us, and in some cases taking us already over, tipping points that threaten the entire existence of human civilization as we know it, while extinguishing species at an unprecedented rate. So in reality, ecocide already is a crime of most serious concern to the international community as a whole. It simply isn't listed on that statute, not yet. But I'll tell you something exciting, and it's this. The amendment process for the Rome Statute is actually quite simple. Any member state can propose it. A simple majority can put it on the table for discussion. For adoption into the statute, 2/3 of member states must agree to the amendment. Now, the ICC is a one-state, one-vote forum, like the United Nations. But unlike the UN, there is no Security Council. No state has the power to veto an amendment. So once it's on the table, it's simply a matter of time to accumulate the collective support. Once it's on the table, the writing is on the wall. And the process of amendment itself creates a kind of compliance period. So the law may not yet be in place, but we can all see it coming. Investors, insurers, CEOs and policymakers all know that drastic changes are required if humanity is to thrive into the future. Ecocide law is the simple course correction that can support those changes. It can level the corporate playing field, enabling the many solutions that are out there, from regenerative farming to renewable energy to circular economy, to truly begin to engage, while giving bad actors the guardrail they need to guide them back towards safe practices. And as every entrepreneur knows, there is nothing like a clear parameter for unleashing innovation and creativity. All of this, my dear friend Polly Higgins saw clearly. And the campaign we started together, Stop Ecocide International, focuses exclusively on helping to make this happen. It's a funny thing. When Polly was diagnosed with terminal cancer, we received many hundreds of messages, often sad and shocked and wondering what would happen to the work if she died. Would it die with her? But in fact, when it came to it, the reality was quite the reverse. Because when Polly departed, I started to receive a new kind of message. How can we help you make sure this happens? People started stepping up in support. And it is happening. Over the last 2 years, I've realised and discovered just how many dots were waiting to be joined. With campaigns elsewhere, with international criminal lawyers, with politicians, diplomats, faith leaders, and influencers. In November 2019, Pope Francis called for ecocide to be made an international crime. The following month, small island states, or perhaps I should say great ocean states, Vanuatu and the Maldives, called on ICC member states to seriously consider amending the Rome Statute to include ecocide. President Macron of France and the new Belgian government have declared their support, and parliamentary motions have been submitted in Sweden. In Spain, the government has been asked by its Foreign Affairs Committee to examine legislating for ecocide nationally and internationally. Finland, Canada and Luxembourg have all expressed interest, and the EU has voted to encourage its member states to recognise ecocide. Our foundation has now convened a panel of top international criminal lawyers to draft a robust legal definition of ecocide that can be considered for proposal at the ICC by interested states. And we're already in dialogue with parliamentarians from an additional 12 countries who are eagerly awaiting the resulting definition. We have campaign teams and associate groups in 14 countries and websites in 9 languages. But ultimately, it's about more than just our particular campaign. It's about a global conversation. And fundamentally, it's about a concept. This relatively new word, ecocide, that encapsulates something, the terrible extent of damage that we can all perceive to be happening to the natural living world all around us in many different ways. And the moment we understand the word, we intuitively know it to be both dangerous and morally wrong. It is a small but essential step to go from acknowledging that understanding to calling for it to be reflected in law. And together, we can all take that step. And as every one of us amplifies this conversation, we actually make ecocide law inevitable. We make it inevitable because it's such a foundational and obvious law to put in place. It protects everything we love, everything we hold dear, and everything that sustains us. It protects the future of life on Earth. Thank you.